Hey, how's it going, guys, and welcome back. So Moonstone Island, a monster taming, deck building, farming, and social sim title has just released on Steam with the Nintendo Switch port coming in the near future, and today we're going to be reviewing it accordingly. In this video, we'll be going over the game's premise, basic gameplay loop, and its caveats, some misconceptions I myself had going into the game, and more. So as per the usual, make sure to sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about what Moonstone Island is and how the game functions. So Moonstone Island is essentially a mix of several different genres, all compiled into one visually impressive pixel art game. You have the social sim, farming, and crafting elements from games like Stardew Valley, and you have the deck building and monster taming mechanics from games like Pokemon and the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Now, the premise of the game from a story perspective is quite simplistic, laid back, and what you'd kind of expect from this type of game. You essentially start out as a young adult ready to embark on their 1-year alchemy apprenticeship, where you essentially go to a place called Moonstone Island to live life on your own for 1 year and discover the secrets that it holds. The land of Moonstone Island is a vast skyland where there are over 100 islands spread across the map for you to explore. The world is also inhabited by creatures known as spirits, which are essentially these monsters that can be tamed and utilized in combat against other wild spirits and even boss monsters. And that's pretty much where the major story implications sort of end. It's a very simple premise that sets you up and lets you do what you want gameplay wise. I also don't want to go into anything else because I'm not trying to spoil any major plot points or just parts to this game overall, so we're going to leave it at there for story. Now, speaking of gameplay, there are a few different aspects of the game to go over, so I'll briefly talk about each of them. So firstly, there's obviously the farming and life sim elements, each of which have their own depth and uses. You could pretty much farm anywhere you want by digging up holes and planting seeds and returning to water these seeds, and you can even automate this as well by crafting a fountain, so the various crops that you have will grow on their own, and then you could use them to aid your journey. The social aspects come from the town itself. You could pretty much converse and date any of the characters within the town and build your relationships with them. Now, full disclaimer, and I think it's very important that anytime someone is reviewing a game to make their biases known, but I don't personally really care for social elements in video games. I'm more of a get down to the combat type of person and explore, so I will say that I have not delved into these mechanics deeply as they're just not my taste. Now, that being said, when it comes to the exploration and combat side of things, this is where the game, at least for me, got really exciting because you're essentially given free reign to explore wherever you want as long as you've crafted or found the tools necessary to do so. Early on in the game, you start with just a balloon that lets you go from island to island, which has a very limited range and is incredibly slow, which works at first but definitely will not take you everywhere you need to go in a convenient manner. You can upgrade your ability to fly around later on by using the game's very robust crafting system, which allows you to obtain a broomstick which can travel much further, and eventually a magic plane, which is the pinnacle of island traversal. Now, outside of just exploring random isles for no reason, many of these islands have dungeons associated with them, which all culminate in a boss battle, leading you to collecting 30 mirror shards, which are required for the game's completion. When traveling from island to island and within dungeons, you'll also run into, like I said earlier, other spirits, which in turn can battle you in turn-based combat, which feeds off of the deck building aspect of the game I mentioned earlier. Essentially, when you're battling, you have a deck filled with cards, each of which is associated to one of your monsters and have their own special effects based on whether or not they're a damaging or skill card. I could make an entire video talking about and praising the diversity in the cards and how you can create some really crazy combinations and whatnot, but needless to say, there is a lot of complexity here that is by no means overcomplicated nor too simplistic. You have many things to consider, like, do you want to have a larger deck or do you want to keep it small so you can get your best cards more often? What kind of monsters do you want in your deck? Will they complement each other? Do you have enough cards that take down armor versus those that just do damage, etc.? The combat system itself outside of the cards essentially works with an energy system where you have 3 what are basically action points, and each card will have a different value of points that it takes per turn, usually 1, but more powerful ones can use 2 or 3. Once you've used up these points, you can end your turn and the enemy will do the same. Every monster has a certain amount of shield stacks as well, which can be torn down through various means in order to make monsters dizzy, which then make them take more damage and lose their turns. You're going to want to make sure you have moves that strip enemies of these stacks, otherwise you're going to be doing reduce damage a lot of the time and be taking extra damage as well. There are also skill trees in place which allow you to upgrade certain aspects of your character, or even like debuff bosses. The crafting system is also very plentiful, with there being various types of items to craft, such as your standard items like bridges and fences and whatnot, but you can also craft magic items which do a lot more. Did I mention that all of the islands in the game are procedurally generated? This means that each time you play the game, you are going to be receiving a unique experience, and I genuinely think they did an amazing job with it. Okay, now let's quickly talk about some of my misconceptions before we go into my critiques. One thing that I have noticed in the genre is the increase of monster taming games that fuse that genre with farming-esque games like Stardew Valley. Monster Harvest did this, Ova Magica's doing this, Chronomon's a new game we discussed on the channel that's doing it, and there's a lot more. I said this before, but I don't have the attention span to put a lot of time into farming. It's not something I'm personally interested in. It doesn't give me dopamine, and I've always been like that. I'm just the type of person to explore and battle, and if you're into those types of games, there's obviously no shame in it. It's just not a preference of mine. When I saw Moonstone Island for the first time, I honestly thought that it had some impressive pixel art, sort of reminded me of The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap, which is one of my favorite 2D Zelda games, and the battling looked interesting, which was another thing I wasn't really sure I would enjoy because I've never really played deck building, but I was definitely surprised on that front and really do enjoy that. But I was worried that the game would force me to do a lot of farming and stuff that I didn't really want to do, and some games in the genre have lost me because of the amount of farming and lifestyle stuff that they kind of force on you. Moonstone is not one of those games. I will be completely honest with you guys, I barely farmed. I've got like the most pathetic farm you can imagine, and I've just been exploring dungeons, screwing around with my deck, taking out these bosses and crafting stuff to make myself better at those things. The game really does give you the freedom to do what you want, and that's something that I think is really important when trying to get a wider array of people interested in your title, especially when it comes to monster taming fans, many of which grew up with games like Pokemon that really cap out at berry growing as far as farming is concerned. I do think that the game starts out a little bit slow if you're someone who doesn't care for farming and social aspects. This is to be expected because, again, a sizable chunk of the game's identity is something that I'm not personally into myself, but despite this, I found the game to be very enjoyable and definitely think you should give it a try, even if you're like me and usually aren't into these types of games. I genuinely don't think you'll be disappointed. Now that said, I did find one issue with the game and one sort of critique as well. Both of these things aren't major issues, but could definitely affect your gameplay experience. One of them is that there is a soft lock present in the game, and I'm assuming this will be fixed very quickly, but essentially, if you accidentally use a card that asks you to draw from your discard pile at the beginning of a battle, because you have no discard pile, the game will tell you that, but then the game will get stuck. This specifically happened to me with the sacrifice card, so that's definitely something to look out for, and I'm hoping that does get patched really soon. And in terms of combat itself, the animations are quite simplistic when it comes to attacking and whatnot. I know this is a deck building game specifically, and the sprites are kind of like extra to that. I mean, if you look at other card battling games like Yu-Gi-Oh, you don't even get monster sprites, but I definitely think that adding some flair to some of the animations could definitely improve the quality overall. And I will say that some of the game's major mechanics are not necessarily hidden, but also not really in your face, so you could end up missing some stuff just because you have a crappy attention span like me. But other than that, those are my thoughts on Moonstone Island. I think it's a really enjoyable game, and I can only imagine if you are a fan of games like Stardew, this would quantify your enjoyment exponentially. I do know that this review is a little bit different, but I personally can't stand it when game journalists and even content creators will put out reviews for games that are a part of a genre that they're not personally interested and don't take that into consideration when considering certain aspects of a game, and then say they're bad. Like, imagine if I said, oh, the game's boring because I don't want to farm, even though I don't have to farm, and even if I did, why would I go out of my way to fully review a massive farming sim when that's something I'm clearly not into, and then bash the game over it? Moonstone Island is a really high quality game, and I definitely think you should check it out and subscribe to this channel for more videos, because I've got a few interesting ones planned, as well as our Let's Play series, which is really fun, especially if you like watching me fumble a little bit here and there. You can also check out my Twitter, Discord, and Patreon for more, and special thanks to the patrons, especially Jim Hamilton, Dro Ghost, Dark Persona Exodus, and Candy Morency, and I'll see you next time. Peace.